Mr. President,
The Republican leader.
I ask consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, one of the most gratifying things about spending a good deal of time in the Senate, as I have, is the optimism that comes from seeing talent renew itself year after year. I've had the good fortune of having many talented staffers over the years, and the staff I have now is an incredible group. But every one of them will tell you that when Kyle Simmons gets up from his tidy desk and walks out of his office this Friday, the office they return to on Monday will be a very different place. It's been said that no one is indispensable, and that may be true. But few of us can imagine S-229 without Kyle Simmons in it. So it will take some adjusting. And part of that adjustment involves doing something this week that Kyle never did. We're going to speak well of him. We're going to talk about his many virtues. We're going to make him a little uncomfortable, because every single person on my staff knows what it's like to be singled out for a good piece of work or for going above and beyond the call of duty. Everybody, that is, except our chief of staff. Now it's our turn. The first thing to say about Kyle is that he's humble. And that's really saying something in this town. Most people in Washington look in the mirror in the morning and think they see a future president. Not Kyle. If he looks in the mirror at all in the morning, I would imagine that what he sees is the son of a Baptist minister who was blessed with a privilege he didn't seek, and who's tried to earn that privilege every single day, regardless of how well he did the day before. As he used to tell his father, "Dad, I'm always just one mistake away from looking for a job." He had a modest upbringing, but he excelled at everything. One day when Kyle was about 10 years old, he made his way over to Tate's Creek Public Golf Course and picked up a club. Soon enough, he was a better golfer than his dad. It was a sign of things to come. A sign that for him, as for so many others in this country before and since, success would come not from who he knew or where he came from, but from hard work and the determination to succeed. When Kyle showed up in Washington, he didn't have any connections. He didn't have an Ivy League degree. He didn't even have a job. All he had was some furniture he'd gotten from his grandfather and a lot of talent. He got evicted from the first place he rented because the owner of the building wanted to tear the building down. As his old friend and roommate at the time put it, we were just two country bumpkins in a crowd. We just wanted to pay our electric bills. There were times, I'm sure, when back home didn't look so bad. And after a series of jobs outside government and a brush with politics during the 1992 presidential campaign, Kyle decided he'd been in Washington long enough. And so he moved back to Kentucky, but this time with enough experience under his belt to run a corporate communications shop in Louisville. And that's just what he was doing when I first met him on an elevator at the old Sealback Hotel. I just lost my press secretary, and we struck up a polite conversation. The second thing you notice about Kyle is that he's unfailingly polite, and then we pulled a Cheney on him. We asked him if he wouldn't mind coming up with a list of candidates for us, which he did with characteristic diligence. And when he'd gone through the list, we asked him if maybe he'd be interested in the job. Soon after that, he was sitting at a desk in the Russell Senate office building. He was a quick study. Not even a year had passed before I knew that Kyle was the guy I wanted to manage my next campaign. I sent him down to the office I've always used out on Bishop Lane in Louisville, and he did a flawless job. In a year when Bill Clinton got reelected and carried Kentucky for the second time, Cal got me reelected by 12 points. It was a landslide, a truly remarkable feat. After that, he just went from success to success. After returning from Kentucky, I put him in charge of my office. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. Nothing rattled him, and he was always thinking of the one thing that no one else had thought of. Whether it was taking apart what I thought to be a terrific idea and patiently explaining to me why it wasn't such a good idea, or mapping out a legislative or political strategy when everyone else was ready to take a break, he became the calm navigator in the middle of the storm. The one person in the office who never took his eye off the destination we had set. And when it came to smoking out some unforeseen problem or vetting some proposal for potential pitfalls, he was, and is, quite simply, the best I had ever seen. It was a skill I always thought I was pretty good at, but Kyle was far better. And it's impossible to overstate the value of that kind of mind in politics. Now, many of the people who might be listening to me right now are probably asking themselves why they never heard of this guy. That's no accident. Kyle was never in it for himself. I know as well as I know the sun's coming up tomorrow that through 3 Senate elections, 2 whip races, 2 leader races, and countless legislative efforts in between, that he never put his own interests ahead of mine. He was as loyal as he was effective. He's made me look better than I am for 15 years. And nearly everything I've accomplished over that time, I owe in part to him. He always deflected attention. And if he was suspicious of anything, it was the glory seekers, the people who like to talk about themselves. It's something he just never did. He kept his own counsel, and he kept to himself. As his mother used to say, Kyle can keep silent in 30 different languages. But if you ever do get Kyle to talk about his accomplishments, he'll probably tell you that his proudest professional achievement was finding a talented group of people in Washington, D.C. who had the same attitude about the limelight and about the empty praise that he does. He'll tell you the thing he's the proudest of is the staff he put together and that he'll soon leave behind. But he was always the one who set the example. On any given day over the past few years, any visitor to our office could be excused for wondering who the tall guy out in the reception room asking one of our young staff assistants whether she'd found an apartment yet and whether it was a safe neighborhood. I'd never be able to look your parents in the eye if anything ever happened to you, he'd say. And anyone who had the privilege of sitting in one of our morning staff meetings could be excused for wondering who the guy was at the end of the table who seemed to know absolutely everything. From the legislative details to the fact that some of the Senate pages would be graduating later that day, and that one of them was from Kentucky, and that his dad had just died, and that our #1 priority in the office that day would be to make that young man feel like $1 million. Any visitor to our office could be excused for being astonished at seeing that same tall gentleman walk away from a room full of CEOs to focus on a staff issue, or seeing him sneak out during an important vote so he could get home just a little while to see his little girl before she went to bed. And anyone would be amazed at how he could manage such a high-pressure environment with such efficiency, focus, and vision without ever losing his sense of humor. He inspired confidence in the staff, and he inspired loyalty. Everything I ever asked him to do, he did well, especially when he had every excuse not to. I asked him to manage a campaign, even though he'd never managed a campaign before. I asked him to run my office, even though he'd never run an office before. I asked him to put together a leadership staff, even though he'd never done that before. He'd never done any of these things. But he excelled, and he excelled at every one. And he never needed the praise. I assure you that kind of person is in very short supply here in Washington. Someone once said that the best business in the world would be to buy someone for what they're worth and to sell them for what they think they're worth. It was never that way with Kyle. He was always worth more than he thought he was, and that's why he will succeed at whatever he chooses to do. In the meantime, he leaves a legacy. I can't tell you how many senators have come up to me over the past week to tell me how much they'll miss his counsel, his advice, and his steady hand. He's left a lot of himself in this place, and it's better for it. Above all, though, Kyle leaves his example. It's the example of someone who showed you could be committed to winning and gracious at the same time, that you could be intensely focused without losing sight of the human beings around you, and it's just that combination of aggressiveness and caution, political savvy and humanity, that anyone who's worked with Kyle has come to admire and will miss. And now that he's leaving, I'm just as confident that our office will carry on just as it always has, because he leaves a fantastic team behind. That's because Kyle's solution to everything was to throw the smartest people in the room at the problem, to find the best talent, but not just any talent. He only wanted people who'd rather be on a team than on the style pages of the Washington Post. In other words, people like him, honest, intelligent, kind, straightforward people with humility, a deep commitment to excellence, and always a sense of humor. You don't get those qualities in Washington, you bring them here. And in Kyle's case, that means he brought them from a quiet street in Lexington, Kentucky, and more specifically from the home of Bill and Barbie Simmons. Now, anyone who ever spent any time at the Calvary Baptist Church, where Kyle's dad served as pastor, could tell you there was one thing Bill Simmons could always count on when he climbed into the pulpit. Whether he was presiding over a Sunday service, a funeral, a wedding, you name it, Mrs. Simmons would always be out there, always sitting in the same spot. She was always there as a point of reference, as a point of comfort for her husband. And when I think of what Kyle is When I think of what Kyle has meant to me over the past 15 years, I can't help but think that's exactly what he's been to me. He's been that steady presence in the midst of it all. As long as he was there, the team was confident things would turn out well, and they always did. To me, he's been more than a staffer. He's been a colleague, a confidant, and a dear friend. Kyle once summed up his approach to the job, and I'd like to share it because every senator should be so fortunate as to have a chief of staff who would write such a thing. It's from a letter that he left on the chair of my other chief of staff, Billy Piper, the day Billy took Kyle's job in the personal office 7 years ago. After a brief introduction, here's what Kyle wrote. He said, "Billy, while you sit here, you are no longer simply Billy Piper. You are Billy Piper, Senator Mitch McConnell's chief of staff. Carry the privileges and responsibilities just as you have throughout your outstanding career, with humility and with honor." Kyle went on, he said, "It's a constant struggle while balancing the demands of your time to remember your audience, the people of Kentucky, the staff who looks to you for leadership, and Senator McConnell. We're only here for a short period of time, and few of us have made it to where you now sit. Do us proud." He was honored to serve the Senate and his country, and yet at the end of that service, he knew he had a more important job still. It was the job of husband and father, and that's why, to paraphrase Macbeth, nothing became Kyle's service to the Senate more than the leaving of it. His first love was and is his dear wife, Carrie, and their beautiful daughter, Ava, and the Senate couldn't compete with that, as much as it tried to, especially these last few months. So he has made the right decision, as he usually does, but that doesn't